Luke 10:38 through 42. Now as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all this work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are needed, indeed, only one. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." The word of the Lord for the people of God. I don't know. I'm sure you all have had one or two experiences of being in some sort of friendship or relationship where you're just meeting someone for the first time, but you become fast friends, whether that's a best friend or it turns into some sort of romantic relationship. But in my experience, when you're just starting out, someone always has to be talking, right? You don't like the awkward silence. You don't know exactly what to talk about, but you don't want to make a fool of yourself. So someone's always got to fill that space with some sort of dialogue. And it was usually me, and it was usually me still making a fool of myself. When Anna and I first started hanging out, talking and stuff, I think I've finally cracked the code a little bit on her because she was a very, very quiet person. She is content with herself, with being a person of few words a lot of the time, and I do really appreciate that because I've come to know that when she does speak, it is very deliberate and important to her. But therefore, the filling of the void of silence would usually come to me. And so, yeah, you kind of get through it, or even just with close friends, like, hey, I think I want to be friends with you, but like I don't know exactly what to talk about yet because I don't really know you, you don't really know me, so you get a lot of small talk and all of these things. But as that relationship grows, you come to become more comfortable with one another, and the silence isn't so awkward anymore, but instead you can just be together. And it's comforting a lot of the time to just sit together in a room and not have anything to say, and that's okay. I kind of have come to learn this more and more, especially in my relationship with Anna, and was she's been gone 2 different times in the past month, and I've told many of you that I've been a lost puppy, waiting for her to come back. And really, a lot of the time, I just want to. I don't need to be a man of many words, but really just to be in the same room, to lay on the couch and be comforted by the presence with one another is enough for me. And I really appreciate that time. But I think also as a relationship grows or a friendship grows, it can also become so comfortable with one another that you forget how special and meaningful it is to just be together. And you start to busy yourself with chores and schedules. For some of you, maybe kids, soccer practice, or even helping the neighbors or helping your church family with things, leading Bible studies, all the crazy things of life come to be a lot in our lives, even if they are good. But Even when the best things are filling your schedule, this could begin to eat away at a healthy relationship or friendship because those things need quality time and tender care. And that can come even just from being together in each other's presence and silence. But sooner or later, you realize that you've become maybe distant with this friend or partner, and you don't really know why, but it's because you've continually filled your life with these things to do and do and do, and it has left you without margin for one another. I'm sure Martha in this passage wasn't doing anything bad. She was probably just trying to be a good host for her very special guest, and probably making sure food would be ready by dinner time, or making sure that the bed was made up for Jesus. Just wanting everything to be just nice and neat, to be a good and perfect host. But what maybe she didn't realize is that everything didn't have to be so nice and neat, and maybe Jesus was perfectly content just being in their presence, something that Mary seemed to recognize. And can I be honest with you? I don't want to trash on Martha because I also find it hard just to be sometimes. We live in a world of distractions, of chaos, of all the things that need to get done. And sometimes summertime can be a time of craziness, having the kids home from school or going on family vacations, or some people find summertime to be a time of rest, or we hope it to be, and for some reason it never is. But I find it hard sometimes just to slow down. That, in this passage, the one thing that is needed, the most important thing that Jesus is trying to get at is to just be at the feet of Jesus. And I know that. I can read this passage over and over and over and over again, and I can tell you again and again that the most important thing in my life is to be Jesus and is to sit at the feet of Jesus. But why is it so hard to do that, right? Other things, whether good or not, have gotten in the way and have begun to take priority. I started a new job not too long ago, and I was really excited because I used to have to get up at like 5 in the morning every morning and work outside all day, and it really wore me out. And I was excited to have a couple more hours to sleep in and maybe get into a better rhythm in the mornings and have a little more structure to my life. But now I get to sleep in 2 hours longer and still, for some reason, can't get my lazy butt out of bed to spend 10 to 20 minutes with God in the mornings to really reset and start my day well. And that frustrates me. Or even if it's not that, even if I do get up early, then I'm sitting there and I start to think about all the things that need to be done before I get to work or at work or after work, and making sure that the house is nice and neat, or the dishes that I didn't do the night before are done so Anna doesn't yell at me. And so there's just these distractions and these things that always seem to get in the way. And like I said about Martha, and maybe with us too, they can be good things that fill our calendars. I think something that we've focused a lot on recently here at New Heart is getting outside the walls of the church and being the hands and feet of Jesus to our neighbors in our everyday life. And that is good and that is right, and we will continue to be talking about that because that is what we are called to do. But also, to truly be prepared and equipped for this kind of faithful work, we must be in relationship with God first. I'm reminded today of a few stories that I hope will help me alter my way of thinking and being. And I hope these stories will do the same for you. The first is the story that we see early on in Genesis, soon after the creation narrative of God dwelling in the garden with Adam and Eve. It's the initial intention when God created humanity was just to dwell together in the perfect garden, having everything that was needed right there. To just be, no striving, no shame, no distraction, to just be with the Creator and for the Creator to be with the good creation. And even once sin was in the world and causing separation, God still continued to make ways for us to dwell with him. Which leads me to my next story. In Genesis 15, we see God make a covenant with Abraham. Well, Abram at the time. God promised Abram that even in his old age, he would have a son of his own flesh and blood, and that his offspring would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. He also promised for Abram and his descendants this land. That's where we get the term, the promised land. And Abram asked God, he says, this is good, and I'm excited, and I believe you, but how can I know that we will gain and possess this land? So God says, okay, Abram, bring me a heifer and a goat and a ram, each 3 years old, and along with that, a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all of these to God, and God instructed him to cut these animals in half and create on each side some sort of walkway. And then he waited for the presence of God, and as he waited, he fell asleep. And when the sun had set and the darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between these pieces. And on this day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land. Now, you may be wondering, Riley, what has this got to do with Mary and Martha and with being with Jesus? Well, let me explain. First, let's talk about this covenant. In the covenant-making process, God has Abram go get these animals and separate them into the two halves as a sacrifice, and creating a walkway through each half. And this may sound crazy or weird, but this is actually a normal practice in the covenant-making process. The significance is that the lesser of the parties would walk through these animals as to say, let this be done unto me if I do not hold up my end of the bargain. Crazy, right? Let this be done unto me, what has happened to these animals, if I do not hold my end of the covenant up. But as Abram waits for God to show up, he falls asleep, and that is when God comes to Abram in the fire, and God is the one who passes through these animals. This is to say, don't miss this, this is to say, let this be done unto me, unto God, if you do not hold up your end of the covenant. It is God being the one who passes through, making it about his faithfulness. Traditionally, right, it would be Abram who should have walked through, the lesser of the two parties. And he would be the one punished if he did not hold up his end of the covenant. But we don't even find out till 2 chapters later, in chapter 17, what Abram's end of the covenant even is. Here we see the command for circumcision and God changing Abram's name to Abraham. But we also, some of the first words we see in this chapter is God saying, walk before me and be blameless, you and your ancestors. Walk before me, walk with me, be with me, and be blameless. But as an act of grace, God walks through the middle of these animals instead, making the entire covenant relationship with humanity dependent on God's faithfulness, not anything of humanity's doing. It is not even until after the terms of the covenant are set that humanity is given anything to do. So humanity's obedience is always meant to be a response of grace, not a striving effort to earn God's grace. God here is setting the stage that it is always humanity's first response to just be. We are not to strive. We are not to try to gain our salvation through our works, but it is God who walks through and God who is saying, this is my relationship and you are my good creation, and this will be off of my faithfulness and not yours. See, the fullness of life only comes from the presence of God. God's original intention was for us to live in that presence. Our first calling is to just be. We do not get any closer to God or gain access to heaven by filling our schedule with more good things or striving to live a better life. Even when humans try to take matters into our own hands time and time again, God is continually meeting us where we are at, inviting partnership and beckoning us to walk before him, to be with him, to sit at his feet just like we were created to do in the first place. So God continues to beckon us to be with him because he knows that his presence is where the fullness of life is at. God keeps partnering with humanity even when humanity does not always keep our end of the deal, and thanks be to God for that. How silly are we to think that we could create the fullness of life all on our own? Throughout the history of the Israelites' unfaithfulness, God remained faithful to the covenant, even when we would not. He remained faithful even to the point of sending his one and only Son to live among us, to teach us how to live, and to give his life so that we may have victory over sin and death. When we were unfaithful, he let it be done unto himself, just what had been done to the animals in that first covenant, so that we would always have access to God through the power of the Holy Spirit. Which brings us back to Mary and Martha in Luke 10. Few things are needed, indeed only one, and it will not be taken away from her, says Jesus. Jesus says the one thing that is needed is to sit at his feet, to allow the thing that we say is most important in our lives to actually take priority. To stop trying to take control of everything and instead sit in the presence of our Creator, the one who's got the whole world in his hands. You guys know that old nursery rhyme. He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 Yeah. I think that's a good reminder for our crazy, busy lives to remember that we are to just be, that there's really little we can do aside from the presence of God. And we recognize that our job is to allow ourselves to be encountered and respond from there. So I know this kind of took a zigzag, but all of this is to say our first response is to be. Before we get out here and we try to show our neighbors or the stranger on the side of the road who our God is, we must be first filled with that God that we follow. And just as we saw in Genesis, what the initial intention of creation was first to be is to just be present. And so you might be asking, okay, well, what now? What might this look like? And I would like to invite you into the practice of contemplative prayer with me this week, to give ourselves 10 to 20 minutes of silence each morning, to be still, fix our whole selves on the presence of God. Get up, do your morning routine. For me, I make myself a little cappuccino in the mornings, and I find a snuggly spot to sit on the couch. I would find a whole extra room to be able to shut the door and be, if you could, for our 600 square foot apartment, we can't really do that. But make yourself a cup of coffee or tea and find yourself a peaceful place to sit, to just be, to recenter yourself on the presence of God to start your day. Maybe as you start, just open your hands and say, Holy Spirit, come. Be with me. And that can be it. Just sit there for 10 to 20 minutes to be with your Creator. You don't have to say a word. God doesn't have to say a word. It can be like the relationship that as you cultivate over time, you find comfort in the silence of being with that special person. And, you know, if you have something to say, let it out and listen for the small inklings of God moving in your midst. But also, don't be afraid of the silence. And if the crazy scattered thoughts come, because they will, maybe have a little pen and a piece of paper to jot down and put it aside, just to continually clear your mind to just the presence of the Lord. It'll come natural over time. I was very convicted of really this thought of first being before I even realized that this was the lectionary passage for this week. So I started to do this, and I'm not good at it, but I started and I forced myself, and it really makes a difference the time that we spend recentering ourselves on the presence of God in the mornings, before even just looking at your phone or looking at the news. And I want to be the one who, I see all of these crazy things happening in the world. I'm like, we have to be out there. We have to say that these things are unjust and these things are not right and that these people are being abused and all this stuff, and it is deeply Christian that we have to do these things. And I get so caught up in that I forget that first I need to be rooted in the presence of Christ, so therefore everything else can flow out of that as I go throughout my day. So I want to remind myself and you this morning that our first job is to just be, and let everything else flow out of our minutes and moments and hours of simply just being in the presence of Jesus. Few things are needed, friends. Indeed, only one. Let that be a good reminder for you this morning.